Hello everyone, today I wanted to make a quick video comparing two kinds of microphones, a tale as old as time, condenser microphones, and dynamic microphones. This right here is going to be the Neumann TLM103, which is a prime example of a really good condenser, one of the best condensers there is. And this, on the other hand, is the Shure SM7B, which is also the prime example of one of the best dynamics that you can get. But these two right here are a great embodiment of the different kinds of microphones, so I thought I'd compare them so you can tell which kind of microphone you need, a condenser or a dynamic for your use case. So let's start with a condenser. So this right here, as I said, is the Neumann TLM103. It is a large diaphragm condenser microphone with no switches, no pads. Obviously, it's an XLR microphone, which means it produces an analog signal, which means it needs an audio interface in order to run correctly. Now, there are a bunch of USB condenser microphones, like this one right here, which is the Audio-Technica ATR 2500, but obviously the quality differs and the capsule size and the ways it gets measured and the noise and so forth, but let's stick with the basics for now. So generally speaking, condenser microphones capture a lot more detail, whether it be in your voice, in your guitars, in your rooms, outside the street, literally anywhere. It captures more detail than the condenser microphones, and they are a lot more sensitive. Now this one right here is using a cardioid polar pattern, which means it captures audio from the front and not so much the sides or the back. So it's a side address microphone because you talk to it from the side and not from the top, which is a mistake that I actually find that a lot of people do for some reason. And I assume that's because most people probably only tried a dynamic microphones like the ones you hold on stage at school or something, and not everyone got to stand behind a studio microphone like this one. But as I said, this is a condenser microphone and it takes a lot of details from my voice, especially when I get really up close. It exaggerates something called the proximity effect. The proximity effect means that the closer you get to the microphone, the more pressure your voice puts on it, and thus more bass is created. Now you might have noticed by now that this microphone right here is taking a lot of my room sound because my room is not actually very isolated. And that is the biggest con with condenser microphones for the most part, besides self-noise and stuff like that, but we'll talk about these. So because this microphone takes so much detail and because my room is unisolated, my voice is getting reflected all over the walls and landing back into the capsule of this microphone, which means you hear my voice and every other reflection of it at the same time. So while for voiceovers and for singing and stuff like that, this might be the best option, and for also video making, if you're trying to make a video essay or if you're trying to record a documentary or even some kind of personal podcast, this will give you more details in your voice and it will make it shine a bit more and make it sound more crispy. But keep in mind that if you're in the situation, you have two options, one of which is to exaggerate the proximity effect, or rather to get really up close to the microphone and talk a bit quietly, because the louder you talk, the more reverb the walls have because your voice is being projected louder. The second option is to sound insulate your room, which some people think they can just slap some foam on the wall and it's supposed to reflect the sound. It's a bit deeper than that. You have to have multiple layers and it's going to cost a lot of money. But if you're eager to do some insulation in your room, you have two options again in the situation, which is either to make a small booth in your room, which should cost about $150 to $300, depends on where you're living and what kind of materials you have on deck. And the second option is to get one of those shields for the microphones. Now, these obviously are not going to be as efficient as the last two options, but they do provide an improvement over the sound. I made a video about it. I think it should be here or here, depends on how the video works. If I know how to do that anyway. It should provide some kind of improvement to the amount of insulation, but it's still not going to be great, though. For $20 to $30, it's going to be quite a good option. I'm not using one right now because I'm recording this with a microphone boom arm, so I won't be able to just connect it right there. Also, I'm standing up just because I had a cup of coffee and I feel a bit energized, so yeah. Bear with me. Now, a few important keynotes about condenser microphones before I move on to the dynamics is that condenser microphones come in 2 or 3 different sizes of the capsule. There's a large diaphragm condenser like this one right here, and there is a medium or small diaphragm condenser like this one right here. This is the Blue Ember. It's a $50 condenser microphone, and while both of these are condenser microphones, the sound difference is huge between them. The Neumann obviously has a lot more details because it has more room for more details and stuff like that, while the Blue Ember not only has a bit less details, but it also has a lot more self-noise, which is the noise created by the capacitors and the amplifiers that are built inside the microphone. Another keynote that this has to be on the higher end of condenser microphones. So condenser microphones, like I just showed you, start at about $50 and they go up to $10,000 or so. So there's quite a bit of variation in quality, quite a bit of variation in price. The most popular ones are the AT2020, which goes for about $100. It sounds good for most applications, for most people at least, who don't do things that are way too professional. And while it has a fair bit of self-noise at about 20 decibels, if you have some background music, honestly 20 decibels if you talk a bit louder, or generally speaking, is not that bad if you're just using one track. But of course, and this is a niche thing, if you're like me and you like to harmonize yourself or layer your vocals on top of each other and using a microphone with high self-noise or high noise floor, the noise floor eventually is going to stack up and it's going to get a little bit bad. And that's why some microphones like this one and the Rode NT1 are great options for having really, really low self-noise, about 4.5 to 7 decibels respectively. Speaking of the NT1, it is the benchmark of condenser microphones. It's about $200 to $250, which is about what you'd expect a good condenser to cost. test. It sounds pretty good, it sounds pretty flat, you can EQ it, you can work on it, but it has a large diaphragm condenser, so obviously be either really up close to it while also making sure that you don't do a lot of pops. So monitor yourself while using these microphones. It is very important that you do, especially if you're planning to get up close like I am. I'm talking to it from the side, so I know it's not going to pop. Maybe it did a few times, but I'll find out about that in post-production. But now, after a lot of yapping, let's move to the dynamics. And this is the Shure SM7B. I don't know why, I just like holding this microphone. It just feels professional, and because it has such a big windscreen, I'm more comfortable saying pops and the letter P in front of it than I would do in front of a condenser microphone. Obviously, a lot of people would decide to put a pop filter in front of the condenser microphone, but it's either that or you talk from the side and I talk from the side, so that's it. Now, it's worth mentioning that if you decide to hold a microphone like this, like I am, make sure not to throw it around in your hands too much. Otherwise, your recordings will have something called a handling noise, which is when I do this and when I just throw the microphone around my hands. Yeah, my voice was gone in the last 5 seconds. My God, I made a mistake. But anyway, this is a dynamic microphone. It works very differently from how the condenser microphone works, and it picks up a lot less details and a lot less of the background noise than your average condenser would. And that's why it's used more for live applications, for streamers. I mean, you've seen every streamer, every video recorder and their mother use this thing, and for good reason. I mean, it sounds good, it sounds dark, it's easy to listen to, and it just sounds wonderful. It sounds so calm, and it works on most voice types. But we're here to talk about dynamics in general, not just about the SM7B. So dynamic microphones are used more for live performances, things on stage, because they reject feedback a lot. And feedback is this ringing sound that you sometimes hear on stage or somewhere in school, I guess, if you had a bad speaker or things like that, and it's really painful. So to avoid that, they use dynamic microphones that only capture the voice from the front and not so much the side. Not at all the back. And obviously, if you can still hear a bit of my voice, it's because the room is very unisolated. And that was my second point. These microphones perform a lot better in non-isolated rooms than condensers, for example, because they take so much less detail. As well as the fact that I have a big windshield in front of the microphone, which should reduce reverbs even more. Now, my voice might sound a bit more muted than it is on the condenser, but that's a trade that you might have to do. Now, these microphones work wonderfully on things like voiceovers and singing and stuff like that, but keep in mind that dynamic microphones in general require a lot more gain or electricity from your audio interface. So if you're going to buy something like this, you might need to get a microphone booster, or you might need to get a good audio interface. Now, of course, if you're doing things like just meetings or calls with friends or live streaming, you're probably not going to encounter many issues. So don't splurge and buy a $150 cloud lifter or $100 dynamite or something like this. It's really not that worth it. People kind of exaggerate it because it is there. But if you're planning to use this for things like, as I said, layering vocals and stuff like that, keep in mind that the noise floor on microphones like these are a lot higher than condensers usually. But obviously condensers taking a bit more sound from the background, so it kind of equals out. Now keep in mind that just because a microphone is dynamic doesn't mean it's going to completely eliminate this background noise, but it's going to do a much better job than otherwise a condenser will. Another thing to keep in mind that most USB microphones are actually condensers and not dynamic microphones. Now a good example of a good dynamic microphone that is also USB is a Rode PodMic USB. This one's a bit more expensive, but there's cheaper options, especially in the Chinese market kind of space. So things like the Fifine AM8, for example, that one's great dynamic microphone that is also USB. Now obviously those have their own cons, but yeah, that's pretty much it for this video. If you decide to get any of the microphones I mentioned in this video, I'm probably gonna have them in some kind of affiliate link in the description below. If you have any questions about audio, feel free to ask me in the comments or reach out to me through my email, and I'm more than happy to help you with any questions. But yeah, I hope this video helped someone, and I hope that you have a very, very, very nice day. Goodbye.